my sister and I would be in the two forward bunks in the sleeping bags, and he would read poems for, I don't know how long, 20, 30 minutes maybe.
Hello, and welcome to the Arts of Language podcast with Andrew Pudewa, founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, or as many like to say, IEW. My name is Julie Walker, and I'm honored to serve Andrew and IEW as the Chief Marketing Officer. Our goal is to equip teachers and teaching parents with methods and materials which will aid them in training their students to become confident and competent communicators and thinkers. So as I was preparing for this podcast today, Andrew, it being June, and I'm wanting to talk about Father's Day. In the same way that we had a episode of Lessons You Learned from Your Mother, I thought it would be great to have a podcast on Lessons You Learned from Your Father. And I know that the conversations that you and I have had over the years, and actually pretty recently, our fathers were a lot alike. We grew up in Southern California in the aerospace industry.
Yes.
My father worked for Hughes Aircraft Company.
Oh, and my father worked for Thompson Ramo Wildrich, TRW Systems.
TRW, yep. And we of course, knew
Which
all
eventually was bought out by Hughes.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And then my dad loved sailboats. Your dad loved sailboats.
He lived to sail.
Yeah. So, and we sailed out of King Harbor Yacht Club in Redondo Beach. I think you were not there.
We sailed out of San Pedro.
Mm-hmm.
So there was the Buccaneer, tiny little cute yacht club, and then Cabrillo Beach Yacht Club that was a little more serious.
Mm-hmm. And which one were you in?
Both.
Both. Oh, you were serious.
Oh, yeah. He could have probably done a third, but I'm sure there were reasons as to why that wasn't wise.
I think probably I'm just intuiting that another similarity between our fathers is that perhaps they did things a little impulsively without talking to their wives first. Like my dad bought me a little Sabot sailboat without checking in with my mother first, and that caused a little bit of consternation at home.
Oh, no, my parents didn't. I don't recall any disagreements of that sort. If they had them, I certainly wasn't aware of them.
Did your mother love to sail as well?
She probably liked it better when she was younger and tolerated it for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think there were certain aspects of it that she enjoyed, but she was very often cold.
Yes.
And she did not like being cold.
Well, and the beaches and the ocean in California is very much cooler than in the Atlantic Ocean, because the California current just brings that cold weather right down from Alaska.
Yeah, and
it's cold at the ocean.
It's damper. Yeah, the humidity level. It's not like, Texas or something, but it's higher.
Well, my mother didn't swim.
Oh.
So she would not get anywhere near a sailboat other than to drop us off at the harbor and say, see you later.
Oh.
Yeah, so she never...
Well, no, we cruised over to Catalina Island, pretty much every weekend during the summer. And she came right along, all the years, and I would catch fish and she would cook them. He would help me figure out the mechanics of catching fish.
Right. Now, did your mother clean the fish as well before she cooked it?
I learned how to do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're talking about him, and I'd start at home. One of my strong memories is Sparklet's drinking water.
Huh.
He loved drinking water, but not tap water.
No.
And so we had these big glass 5 gallons on a stand, and he would lift them up and put them in, and then we would have this, pure drinking water. And I don't know, for better or worse, I have never in my life been able to drink tap water. So,
well, yes, to this day you're a bit of a water snob.
yeah. And of course, those early memories of, roughhousing on the floor. He liked to tinker in the garage. and I would just hang out there with him a lot. I never really caught his aptness for mechanical things. I think a few times I did successfully manage to change the oil in my car, but beyond that, I couldn't do a thing. But he would tinker with cars, and he always had projects going. That's the engineer type, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yep.
And we had a boat from the time I was very, very young. Pretty much the same boat all those years.
What was the name of your boat?
Finesse.
Finesse.
Because my parents played bridge occasionally, and that's a bridge term that, of course, has outside applications. It's basically when you kind of trick someone into thinking you've got something that you don't have, or that you don't have something you do have, and then you win a trick, a point. And so he liked to race boats. So, Finesse, I think it's a great name.
Yeah,
it
it's good.
32-foot Pearson. Not the fastest craft on the water.
No.
I always used to envy the Cal 40s and those boats with low handicaps.
Yes. So you had a higher handicap then, too.
Yeah, 235.
I don't remember what ours was. In
PHF.
Allegro.
You think back and there's specific memories, and then there's kind of a collage of memories. One thing, he was very interested in helping me learn to think about things. One manifestation of that was this game, and I've tried to find it. I don't think it's still in print, but it was called Propaganda. And it would use various forms of propaganda, and you had to identify, which was it. Kind of probably involved detecting logical fallacies and things like that. But I just remember it was a hard game, but I liked it because I always thought, oh, this is making me smarter. But he was very tolerant, taught me to play chess, which I love to this day, although I'm not good at it. And probably the most dominant thing I remember is on that boat, he would read poetry from this book, Poems Old and New, I think. I even have the same book.
Aww.
It's one of the oldest things I have. I have a hairbrush from my babyhood.
Aww.
And that book are probably the two oldest things I still possess.
Okay, so for our listeners who don't understand where Catalina is in compared to San Pedro, what is this, a multi-day trip to get there?
No. It's 20 miles off the coast.
So how long would it take you? So describe a typical weekend.
Oh, well, okay, a typical weekend, he would generally take a day off Friday in the summers, and sometimes a half day on Thursday. And then we would often, he would come home, we would pack up, we'd go down to the boat, we'd get there in the late afternoon. It's 4 or 5 hours to get over there. And I think he liked going in the night because the children were asleep.
Oh.
And no one was complaining about how long it was going to take.
So you motored over there then?
We would motor over, and then I would wake up and boom, you're there, and you can start playing. Or sometimes we would leave in the morning. A lot of times we had to motor because just the wind was not great. Coming back, however, the wind was great.
Right. Yes, because Catalina is to the west of the coast of California, and generally it's the westerly winds that are pounding that beach.
So we'd get going pretty fast. Sometimes even if he was ambitious, we'd set a spinnaker on the return trip back. He just loved water and being on the water and being near the water. It was funny. We'd be at the beach, and I'm just wanting to do stuff. I just want to go somewhere, climb, go on the rocks, build stuff. And my sister's 5 years younger, so, for many years in there, she wasn't really able to
tag along,
do a lot. He liked to just sit with his back up against the little cliffy thing there in the shade and just look at the water and do nothing. And I remember as a kid thinking, how can a person want to do nothing? Now, at my age, I can understand it much better. But we would take long hikes up in the very pretty good mountains. I mean, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours to get to the top of a mountain and back again. Racing was a profound thing.
Yes.
The Cabrillo Beach Yacht Club had wet Wednesdays.
Okay.
During the spring and summer season. Mm-hmm. And so he'd take off, half a day. He had a lot of vacation.
Sounds like it.
I think by the time I left home, he had like 6 weeks of paid vacation or something. Mm-hmm. So he'd take off half the day, and we would get down to the boat by 5 o'clock, and the start of the race, and he'd sail around, and that harbor, San Pedro, Los Angeles Harbor, was very windy. In fact, there was this spot where the wind would kind of come around Point Vicente, and just like they called it Hurricane Gulch.
Oh, uh-huh.
And so it was choppy and wet a lot of the time. And there were a few other of his friends that would crew on the boat, because we needed about 4 people at least, plus little me, to race that boat. Mm-hmm. By the time it was over, it was almost dark, and then you're having to fold the sails and wash down the boat and do all the chores in the dark. Mm-hmm. But I relished those times. Mm-hmm. It is probably a case of until I was old enough to be useful, at which point I became less interested in the whole thing. He more just tolerated having me there participating than I was really important to the success of the venture. But I always felt like it.
You mentioned folding the sails.
Yes.
And if any of our listeners ever did sailing or raced sailboats or anything like that, they might have gotten that wash of memory, nostalgia that just came over me, because you have to do it just right.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do it just right, then you're risking a huge investment.
Both my parents were very particular about folding.
Yeah.
With my mom, it was sheets, and you had to get them just corner to corner, just right. And so to this day, I am fairly meticulous about folding.
Yes.
In fact, I have never let anyone else, well, except for one of my daughters, I've never let anyone wash my clothes because I want to fold them exactly the way I want them.
Yes. Your dad taught you how to fold.
Yeah, so folding sails, packing a spinnaker, there's a trick to that.
Yes, it is, because you've got to...
It's like a parachute. If you don't pack it right, it won't come out right. And
Yep.
It's not quite as consequential, but... And I think the thing that I have noticed about my parents, in retrospect, compared to my years of being a parent and having children,
right,
they were just pretty relaxed about me going away and not being continuously supervised. And I talk about this in my nature deficit disorder talk about how, previous generations, I think parents just trusted children not to get lost or get too badly hurt or get in trouble, and they didn't perceive the world as being so, dangerous.
Right.
And so I would, probably around 12 or 13, I would just take off. They had no idea where I went.
And this was pre-cell phone days.
Oh yeah. And I guess, their attitude came from their childhood. I'm guessing that my father had more freedom as a child even than I did. And you kind of go back generations all the way to that story, Bud and Me.
Okay, yes.
Where the two boys at 7 and 5 years old ride their horses from Oklahoma City to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1904 or something. I can't remember exactly. But, the book just blows your mind because any parents that would allow their children to do something like that today would be in jail for sure.
Yes.
So there was this, I think, very healthy level of non-supervision that I benefited from. It's because you have adventures and you kind of get in a tight spot and there's no one there to rescue you. So you've got to
Figure it out.
Figure out how to get from here to there. Especially I'm thinking hiking, climbing, being on rocks and you're stuck somewhere. You're like, how am I going to get down from here without dying?
Right.
So I don't know. There's it's easy to be nostalgic about those times. There's a website called Free Range Kids, I think, and it's kind of promoting this, like, let your kids go and don't hyper worry about everything, which is the opposite of the way society is going.
Right.
It's like, no, you can't even ride your bike around the block. If I can't see you all the time, I'll be worried. So there was that level. I did have a Sabot, and I raced them. And,
And just so the listeners know, a Sabot is a dinghy. It's a small boat that really comfortably can only sit one, maybe two.
One small person, actually. It's 8 feet, 8.5 feet, something. And one sail. And again, we'd go down, he'd be puttering around the boat, fixing something, and I would just take off in that boat. I would be gone for hours. I remember one time I went so far out into the bay, and then the Hurricane Gulch, the wind started coming. And, I mean, these huge, choppy waves just swamping my boat. And I thought, I could die out here. There's other boats around. It's not like, in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
But and I'm bailing and trying to get back, and you can't pull in the sail too much or you tip over. And I'd come back and you go, "Did you have a good sail?" Like, yeah, great. And then I'd look forward to that level of, risk and excitement again. I always went to the boat show. Did you ever go to a boat show?
No.
That was the time when covetousness would creep in, dissatisfaction. We have this kind of older, slower, more cruising kind of sailboat, and then we'd go look at the newest, slickest, racing boats, and you'd go, climb up. It'd be in a big arena. You climb up a little stairway, and you could walk all the boat and go down and look. We'd look at like every boat except the power boats.
Oh, right.
He had no interest. In fact, basically people who did power boats were just heretics of the worst sort.
Even though there was a motor on your boat.
Yes, but it's a psychological thing.
Yes.
Yes,
our dads were very much alike in that regard as well.
You sail if you can, if it's at all possible.
Yes.
You turn off the engine, even if you're going half as fast.
Exactly.
But if you can't, well, then you can putt along. and they'd have the newest, dinghies and the ultralight Sabots. And, my boat was $200 and these were $1,000.
Yeah.
Totally beyond the scope of anything that was possible. And so you would leave the boat show with this feeling of inferiority. But I always look forward to it. I think he liked having this older boat that needed a lot of TLC because he would just always have a maintenance or improvement project going.
Right.
And I'm kind of the opposite there. I don't like maintenance or improvement projects, particularly of the manual kind.
Yep. So what happened to your sailboat, the Finesse?
Well, he had it till I left home, and then my parents were divorced right around the same time I left home to go to school. And he kept it for several years, and then he upgraded to a bigger boat called Waltzen. It was a 41 feet. I can't remember.
Wow.
It was significantly more comfortable. And then he didn't race his own boat. He raced other people's boats.
I see.
He would be a crew member.
Yep.
And he would sometimes crew on somebody's boat to Mazatlan or Puerto Vallarta.
Wow. There were races to those locations.
Yeah. And these were usually wealthy people who owned really expensive boats. So they would race down and take like 3 days to get there, whatever, because they're going really fast. And then the owner would fly home, and then my dad would be part of the few that would bring the boat back up the coast.
Right, leisurely bringing it
and
back.
they'd go 24 hours and take 8-hour shifts and do that whole thing. He raced to Hawaii one time.
Oh, wow.
He didn't bring the boat back.
No. So do you do much sailing now?
No, I don't. I not only don't own a boat of any
Right.
kind,
Right.
I don't really feel any draw
Yeah.
to that, I guess.
Every now and then I'll take the family out and we'll rent a boat.
Uh-huh.
I think the last time we went out was on Lake Minnetonka in
Oh, really?
Minnesota. Yeah.
Oh, so you haven't rented a boat here in Oklahoma?
No.
We have a lot of lakes
Yeah.
around here.
I guess I've never actually found out where I can rent a sailboat.
Oh, well.
But it was pretty funny when they were kind of quizzing me, like, how do I still know how to sail a boat? It was,
It's
yeah.
like riding a bike.
yes.
You will not forget.
Right.
I will say, though, as a full-grown adult, I did take my children, and we were down there with him, and he had a sabot, and I got in. I tried to sail a sabot,
Yes.
and I realized it is much harder to move from one side of that
Yes.
dinghy to the other side quickly
Yes.
compared to when you're, 100 pounds.
Yes. Pretty little boat. And sabots, there's no place to sit but on the floor. You're sitting right down.
Well, and
into
you
the boat.
tack the boat, and you've got to shift sides.
Yep.
And if it's really windy, you've got to sit on the edge and hike out and keep the boat from flipping over and
Yes.
swamping it.
Great. So tell me about, I know that in your talk, Nurturing Competent Communicators, you started to go here. Your dad read the poetry. You said your mom would read the stories and your dad read the poetry. Obviously, that was a big influence in your life. How did your dad get excited about poetry?
I do not know. We just had this book of poems, and it was just one book, but it was a big, thick book of a whole lot of poems. And he liked, I guess, either he liked them and that's why he read them, or I liked them and that's why he read them. But I liked the funny ones, and I liked the poems that would tell stories. And so if I look at the book that I still own,
Yes.
that he read poems from, the section of humorous poems is very well used. The pages are darker, and it opens to that spot easily, and the rest of the book, isn't nearly as used. But story poems and humorous poems. And that's kind of, I guess, what caused me to really like poetry.
Right.
If it had been left up to my school experience, I have no notable memories of reading poems before high school. And then I remember just reading really hard, horrible poems that weren't really poems, but they said they were. Like The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, which I'm sure has value, but as a 14-year-old in high school English class, you just don't relate to it at all.
Yeah.
And then later, I got very interested in Shakespeare. I think I had one good Shakespeare experience in high school, but the lifelong love of poetry was really cultivated, at home, mostly on that boat. Because at home, he'd read bedtime stories till I could read myself, and then I would read World Book Encyclopedia and fairy tales. It was just a nighttime ritual on that boat. My sister and I would be in the two forward bunks in the sleeping bags, and he would read poems for, I don't know how long, 20, 30 minutes maybe.
So your boat was essentially your hotel room. That's where you slept.
Oh, yeah. Well, didn't you sleep in your boat?
Yes, but I'm just, again, getting inside the head of a listener who may not understand that that's the kind of boat you have.
Oh, yeah. Well, a 30-foot boat, usually you go down, and then there's a couple places on either side to sit.
Tiny little kitchen.
There's usually a pop-up table. I think ours was a fold-down table, so you can sit on either side, and you have a place to eat. And then my dad rigged up this thing that connected the two sides and made like a queen-sized bed, and then they slept in their sleeping bags in a much larger space, and then the 2 forward bunks, and then you push the sails into the sail storage compartment in the very, very bow. And it had our own little shelf, so you'd unpack your duffel bag and put your swimsuit and your socks, and then seashell and $10 collection.
Yes, that's right.
Had a drawer, and you could keep your important stuff like your knife in your drawer. And it was simple, but met every need of a child. We didn't do camping, so a lot of families do that kind of camping thing. We really didn't. In fact, I think I went camping with my grandparents. Only they had a big Airstream trailer, but my dad had no interest in that.
But from my perspective, what you did every weekend was as close to camping. I mean, you camped every weekend.
Yeah, you're roughing it, and you're cooking on the little charcoal grill out and then on the cockpit outside. And I would sometimes catch fish or spear fish. I don't think my dad liked fish very much, but my mother loved the fish. And we usually would have, hamburgers and maybe steak and then fish.
If you happened to catch it.
And then the ice would melt. So we had an ice box. Did you have an ice box? So to do this, you would get a big,
block of ice.
2-foot cube of ice, maybe not 2 feet, 1.5 feet, and put it in the ice box. And then you would put in all of your perishables. Milk for your cereal, the meat, whatever you would normally put in your refrigerator. Only this ice would just melt. So on a long trip, like if we had a long trip up to Santa Cruz Island, we'd be gone for a week. The ice would melt by that time.
Sure.
So there's no more fresh anything, and it was all canned and packaged. But you're a kid, you're always hungry.
Sounds like you had an idyllic childhood with lots of great memories with your father.
Lots of great memories. I think there obviously were challenges in the teenage years. Although I'll finish up with this very humorous, appropriate Father's Day story. So
okay, great.
I took my son with my father and his wife on his nice, spacious boat. We went over to Catalina Island, and my son was, I think, 14.
Okay.
And he was just really being obnoxious and just driving me crazy. And I was so, just getting so angry. And I finally said, all right, I said to him, you get off this boat. You get in that dinghy and you just go away for an hour. I don't want to see you. And if you're not off this boat in 1 minute, I'm going to throw you in the water. Right?
He could swim.
So he's pouting and he goes away. And I turned to my father and I said, did I give you a bit of grief when I was that age? And my father just smiled and said, you have no idea.
Oh, wow.
So, it's a good thing that the happier memories are the stronger ones, and the times where there were conflict seem to fade better. And that's, I guess, a gift of memory.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you for sharing your memories of your father and for sharing, albeit not directly, certainly many lessons you learned from him. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, you can subscribe to this podcast in iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, or just visit us each week at iew.com/podcast. Until then, on behalf of Andrew Pudewa and the team at IEW, I thank you for allowing us to partner with you on your journey toward better listening, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking.